What up, Wastelanders? Christopher here, Gaslands, NorCal. Thanks for joining me once again for another instructional video. Now, a while back, I had somebody make a comment on one of my videos asking how I did my Waterslide decals. And I was like, I could do a video on that. It's not like it's rocket surgery or anything. So that's what we're going to do this time. Now, disclaimer here, I am not a graphic artist. I have trouble drawing a bath. So if you really want to get some custom Waterslide decals, you should hit up Rust Belt Customs. You can find him on Facebook. He does some awesome stuff. So that's who I would recommend for custom decals. Now, if you want to get your hands dirty and you have all the tools and everything to do it yourself, that's what this video is going to show you. So let's get into it and we can do some Waterslide decals. I'm going to go through it step by step and show you all the things that I've learned and how I do it. So who's ready to get wet and sticky? Wait. Alright, so first things first, the two main things you're going to need, obviously, is a color printer and the correct paper. Now, you can either go Inkjet or LaserJet or laser, whatever direction, whatever type of printer you have. The step-by-step is going to be pretty much the same. I have an Inkjet, so that's what I'm going to use it. The two main types of paper that you're going to use are either the clear sheets or the white sheets. The difference between those two is obviously these are clear, the other ones are printing on white paper. So for most of my water slides, I like to print on clear just because otherwise it just doesn't look right. It does look more like a sticker and not so much like a painted bit on one of my builds. So I like to use the clear sheets. Now for these sheets, I just did a search on Amazon. These came up as the least expensive. So these are the ones I ordered. These are the ones I've been using. These are the ones I probably will continue to use because they work. So let's move on with this and I'll show you some of the decals that I have done and some of the builds I've done using those decals. Alright, now as you can see, all those builds are literally just a very minuscule drop in the bucket of all the other ones that I've done using Waterslide decals that I've printed myself. Some of the things you have to keep in mind when you're doing your Waterslide decals, especially if you're printing on the clear paper, is that it's going to be clear. So you really have to keep in mind what color you're putting your decals on. Because the darker it is, the harder it is for your decal to shine through. So like for this one, if I was going to put it on a casting that was white, that would look beautiful. The darker I get, the harder it's going to get to see it. So on a green, at the right angle, you'd probably be able to see the skull and everything else. If I wanted to do a black, there's no way you'd be able to see it. Because all the white stuff that you see on the inside and everything, you're not going to see that. It's all going to be clear. So really keep in mind the color of your casting, the decal that you want to put it on. Now, for some of the ones I've done, all my MFP ones, I paint the builds yellow. You can still see the yellow on there, depending on what shade of yellow I use. But there are ways around doing a lighter decal and putting it on a darker casting. For instance, I printed these Powerpuff Girl decals and I put it on the dark red obviously and just kind of speckle the back of it so those will shine through. If I put it on the red, you wouldn't be able to see them. So that's one way to get around doing the clear decals with the lighter background on a darker build. Now let's get to how we do the decals, how I search for them, everything else, how I print them. Yeah, we'll do up a couple builds and we'll see how they look. Alright, so the first thing we need to do is either find or create the image that we want to print. Now, I'm doing a Wastelands food truck using a horned skull and donuts, so I'm looking for an AI image for a logo for Death Head Donuts. So the first place I go is Google and see if anything's going to come up there. There's all sorts of really cool stuff on here. There's a lot of different AI creation tools you can use, more than I would ever have time to go through in any video, more getting created every day. You can also use Canva. I really like Canva, the free version. You can get so many different requests, and they come up with some really cool stuff. Like, I really like this one over here. It's not exactly what I'm looking for. I also like to use Adobe Firefly. I have a subscription to Adobe, so it makes it easier for me. So again, I just looked for a logo for Death Head Donuts using a horned skull, and this is some of the stuff it came up with. I'm really liking like this black one, or maybe this ram's head skull. So that's probably one of the ones I'm going to use. So we're going to copy this image and paste it into Word. You can use any image generator or image editor tool. I just like Word. I've used it since Christ was a corporal. It's just easy for me, so that's what we're going to do. So let's pick some logos, we'll get them pasted into Word, and then we'll move on to the next step. All right, so here we are in Word, and like I said, you can use any image editing software, Word editing software, whatever you want to use, whatever you're most comfortable with. I like Word. And what I always try to make sure that I do very first is change my layout so my margins are as narrow as possible, so I use as much of the area of the paper as possible, because it's a lot more expensive than just using regular paper. So my margins are on narrow. I'm going to paste in the image that I generated using Firefly, and as you can see, I took out the black background. Now, the next thing I want to do is make sure I size these images correctly so it's going to fit on my casting right. Now, the size I need to do for this image is a little less than ½ inch. So I'm going to resize this image to make sure it's about where I want it to be. And when you're generating your images, keep in mind that how it's going to print and how it's going to look is a hell of a lot smaller on your casting than it is looking at your computer screen. So that's about where I want it to be, and I always like to make sure I have multiple copies printed off, because I may want to use them again in the future. Invariably, I'm going to screw up getting one of them on there, whatever the case may be. So I like to make sure I print off several copies just in case. So we're all ready to print. This looks like it's going to be pretty cool. So next we're just going to go through and print it to our color printer. Alright, so we're all printed off, everything ready to go. As you can see, I printed off a few different sizes just because I know that I'm probably going to need some different sizes, like to go in the back, or maybe the ones on the side will be too small, or whatever else. Printed off some logos to go on the name boards and everything else. So next what we need to do with these is spray them with the varnish. If you cut these up and stick them in water to get the decals off right now, all of the ink would run off. It wouldn't work. It's frustrating. Been there, done that. So any varnish will work. I like to use matte varnish. You can use gloss varnish, but then your decals will be glossy and they'll look more like the plastic stickers than an actual decal that's going to go on a vehicle or whatever. So I like to use matte. So let's get these sprayed up, and then we'll move on to the next step. I've got my food truck all painted up. Don't worry, I'm not going to keep it just pink. I am going to grunge it up and everything before I let it loose on the Wastelands. But yeah, these things are ready to go. So we'll get these sprayed up, and then we'll move on to the cutting and the application. So let's spray them. All right, now as you can see, I've already gone through and done a little bit of grime, added some agrax to our base. Now the reason that I do that before I put the decals on is that these decals, are all clear. So if I put the decals on there before I do the agrax, then anything underneath the decals is still going to look clean, and it'll really make the area of the decal stand out more, so it won't really blend in as well. So that's why I like to agrax first before I put the decals on there. Now I've got all the decals all cut out. That's another thing to keep in mind when you're using the decal paper, is that these aren't pre-cut, obviously. You have to go through and really try to get them as close as possible so it's not going to stand out. You'll see all the lines from where you cut and everything else. Some other things that are going to help out with this are the different types of solutions that you can use to basically melt the plastic paper portion of the decal and make them appear a little less obtrusive on the model. Those are going to be some of the micro set solutions. We've got one that will soften it and everything else does a little bit, and then the red one, I'm not sure what the difference was between the two is. The red one's really softens it a lot more, and I really only use that if I'm putting decals on areas that are rougher or that have edges that I want the decal to settle into, and I'll show you how I'm going to do that in a second. Now, when I'm putting the decals on, I'm either going to use the blue microset, or I'm just going to use water. I'm going to do some of the decals on this model using both of these types of methods, so you can kind of see how each one of them works a little bit differently. Now, like I've said, I printed off the decals in several different sizes, just depending on where I want things to go. The bigger one, I think I'm going to stick here on the back, so I'll definitely be needing the red micro set, and then the other ones I'm going to be putting on the sides, and then along with the names on the name board portion and on the front. So let's get those going. First, let's do some using the water, and then we'll move on to the blue microset. So I'm going to fast forward through this a little bit because it can take a little time. So let's get the decals on there with the water. Alright, so those decals are all set. I am going to use, like I said, the red microsol on the back of this one here in a second after I get the other decals on there to show you what it does and why I use it and everything else. It's important to let your decals dry, obviously, before you start doing anything else. You can even apply the varnish now if you want to, depending on what else you're going to do with the decal. I'm going to do that once I get done with everything. Now, if you were watching when I was applying the decals, I just use some very fine tweezers to get them on there. And before I go through and dry off the excess water with a sponge, then I can kind of move it around and get it exactly where I want it. Why that's important is if you don't dry the excess water off and then you just set it down and leave it, your decal can slide as the water dries, so it would like slide down and then it would dry there. That's not exactly where you wanted it, so make sure you get off that excess water. So next we're going to put the rest of the decals on there with the blue microset. Now all I do with this, instead of putting it in a larger bin, is I just put some in the lid and dunk them in there, because it's not going to take very long for the decal to separate from the paper with this stuff. So it'll go very, very quickly. So I'm not even going to fast forward through this. I'm just going to dunk them in there and then place them. And one of the things with this is, like I said, it softens the decal very quickly. So you don't want to leave it in there too long, and you don't have a whole lot of time in between taking it out of the solution before you get on the model. Otherwise, it's going to curl and it's just going to get really screwed up, and that's why you print multiple decals when you're doing this. So let's dunk these, get them on there, and then yeah, and then we'll see where we're at, do the red microsol, and get the varnish on there. So. Okay, so I fast forward a little. For the final solution, we're going to use the red microsol. Now, when you're using this, it's best if you use a clear or clean brush. Otherwise, whatever you have on the brush, any residue or anything is going to transfer over, because this is really going to clean it out. Now, all I'm going to do is just dunk my brush in the red microsol and apply it to this back decal, because there's areas on this bottom part of the casting where there's ridges and stuff, and I want the decal to settle in there. And you don't really need a whole hell of a lot on there. Just dab it on there. and let it sit and let it dry. You don't want to dry it off because then you're going to remove the solution and just basically get rid of what you're trying to do. Just put it on there and just let it sit, and that's going to melt the rest of your decal and have it settle into those recesses. So we're going to let this sit, and then we're going to go through and do the varnish on all the models. Now with the varnish, there's basically 3 different methods that I use. If I want a really thick varnish, then I will use some of the Citadel Technical Storm Shield. That is going to make it thicker, so when you're doing any kind of dusting or anything afterward, that's going to kind of stand out. I also will use this Ultra Matte Varnish from AK. That's going to give you a lighter, thinner coating, but it's important to cover the whole area that you're doing the varnish on. Otherwise, just certain areas will appear with that matte varnish. The last method, and the one I'm going to do on this one, is just rattle can it with the varnish. The same matte varnish that I used to cover the decals in the first place. That way you cover the entire model, and you don't have to really try to focus on just the areas where the decals are at. So that's the last step. Varnish it, definitely let it dry, and then finish on with the rest of your model, which is what we're going to do. So let this dry, we're going to varnish it, and then we'll put it together, and I'll show you the outcomes of this Death Head donut, and we'll get them roller onto the Wasteland. So let's do it. Alright, and there we have it. One Death Head donut food truck with custom made decals that we did right here. I hope that I explained everything well enough, and the step-by-step tutorial was educational and you gleaned something from it. If you have any questions about any of the stuff that I've done or any stuff that I do, where I get my stuff, please leave a comment, let me know what else you would like to see, and I would be happy to get back to you and let you know whatever information that I can. If you enjoyed this video, you learned something, do me a favor, hit that like button. My goal is to do weekly videos, whether they're vehicle builds, terrain builds, battle reports, whatever. So if that's for you, hit the sub button below and ring the bell to get notified when new content drops. I do sell all my builds pretty inexpensively on my Etsy page, so if you want to pick something up, see what else I've done, you can even request a custom build. If you'd really like to show some love, head on over to my Patreon page and get signed up. Every bit helps keep the paint flowing, the printer printing, and the camera rolling. Until next time, keep your foot on the gas and your finger on the trigger. Gaslands NorCal, signing out.